Welcome back to the PT Graduate Podcast. My guest today, Mr. Damian Kristof. How are you?
Oh, great, Rich. I'm really good. How you doing?
Fantastic. I'm really good, and this is exciting. I'm really looking forward to catching up, picking your brains, and finding out about the stuff that you do. So let me just check my list here: nutritionist, naturopath, chiropractor, longevity expert, podcaster. There's a number of there's a number of things there, and I've probably still missed a couple of other things off.
That's heaps. That's heaps. That's all we need to talk about. That's all we need to talk about. Um, yeah, they're the things I'm doing these days. There's been lots of things I've done over the years. Obviously, being in New Zealand for 5 years, nearly 20 years ago.
Yeah.
I did lots in New Zealand at the time and had a
Hmm.
great time. Geez, I mean, it's so hard to leave New Zealand anyway, as you know. You've been there for quite some time
Yeah.
now. But
Yeah.
I love it. Like I still call it, it's like my second home, even though I haven't been back for such a long time. But to say something like a Kiwi might say it, I bloody miss it.
Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
is,
Yeah.
yeah, I really do.
Was it study that brought you over here originally?
It was. I was studying chiropractic over in Australia here and didn't really love it. And so then I thought, well, where's the best college in the world? And at the time, it was New Zealand College of Chiropractic and still is the best college in the world. So
All
I would
right.
still say that it's still number one, numero uno. So
Hmm.
I went over there to study at that time. And that was in 2004. And just fell in love with the place, like
Hmm.
absolutely loved New Zealand, and then really bunkered down to work hard in New Zealand and to do some really fun stuff. Like I did some super fun stuff in New Zealand from a work perspective, but a lifestyle perspective, and it was really kind of where I learned about fitness as well. My first ever personal trainer was in New Zealand, and
Right.
Logan Reardon, like he was a cracking guy, Logs, and
Yeah.
so I was trained by Logs for a while and had a really great time over there. Yeah, it's
Fantastic.
good.
People may know the name, but they may not necessarily know where from. But I think Kiwis that have been around for a while would probably know the show Downsize Me, and that you were one of the co-presenters on that show. So tell us a little bit about that. I mean, I do remember seeing a few episodes, but how did that come about?
Rich it was a crazy situation. It was I when I moved to New Zealand, I had literally $5,000 in the bank and nothing on my credit cards, and that's all I had to my name. I had a mortgage back in Australia, um, and I just separated from my partner, and we still had this mortgage, and so I moved to New Zealand. I went to the Ellerslie market and with a checkbook bought a car, a Honda Prelude, a blue one, for $2,500 with a check. And I was like, oh my gosh, I've got $2,500 left. I was sleeping on my mate's floor, who was the president of the chiropractic college at the time, Brian Kelly.
Mm,
And I was really trying to make ends meet. In fact, I got to a point in my life where I was earning such a little amount of money and I had zero cash. I was buying one of those trays of eggs, like 36 eggs,
mm.
and a loaf of bread. What's the really nice bread that's in New Zealand? What's that really nice bread?
Is
Soft
it
and
Molenberg or Freyers or
starts with V.
Vogels? Vogels.
Vogels,
Yes.
Vogels bread,
Yes.
Vogels bread, and and I would, if I could afford an avocado, I'd buy an avocado. If I couldn't afford an avocado, I'd have butter.
Yeah.
But that's what I had for 3 meals a day, basically, as I was like bare bones. And I was practicing as a naturopath at the back of another friend's house, another friend's practice, a chiropractor in Remuera, Sherry
Mm.
Brady, and Dave K, and I leased a room from them at an amount of money that I couldn't afford. So I was paying
Right.
way too much money from what I could afford from a rent perspective
Mm.
for this one little office to practice naturopathy from.
Mm.
And I set up a weight loss program because I was like, you know what, I've just got to make ends meet. So I'm just going to,
Yeah.
do some weight loss. And there's another guy who was studying Cairo at the time, and his girlfriend was a naturopath, and she wanted a place to work from. I said, "Hey, why don't you come and work from this place?" So she was sort of subletting for me, and then using my weight loss program, which I've been running in Australia for a bit of time. And she was doing great with it, going really well. And then she broke up with this guy and moved back to Australia. And then some weeks later, there was a phone call, can I speak to the naturopath who does the weight loss program? And the receptionist at the time said, oh, she's now left. And I'm like, hang on a second, I'm the guy, like I'm the one. And so as it turned out, Tamara, who was the receptionist at the time, handed me over to this lady, an English lady, Alex. And Alex said to me, I'm looking for a female nutritionist, naturopath to help with the weight loss program. And I'm like, well, I run a weight loss program and I used to have a female naturopath doing this, can I help you? And she said, well, I was really looking for a female. I said, well, just is it for you? And she goes, no, it's actually for a TV show. And I said,
Ah,
well, why do you need a female? Can't it be a male? And she said, well, I suppose it could. We just thought we'd do a female. And so I was like, well, she said, do you want to come and meet with me? And so I did. I went and met with her at TV3 Studios.
yeah.
She said, well, would you be interested in auditioning for the presenter role? And I was like, what's a presenter do? And she said, that's the one that speaks in front of the camera to the camera. And I said, oh, me do that. And she goes, why don't you just do this? And so I did this thing. I went to the fridge in the TV3 offices. I found Mars bars. I found Coca-Cola. I found all this rubbish food. And she goes, what would you do if you saw this in someone's house? So I started throwing it around the kitchen. I was throwing it in the bin. I'm going, this is disgusting. 5 minutes on the hip, on the lips, 10 years on the hips kind of
Yeah,
thing. And I was making up
yeah.
all these things as I go. And she goes, oh my God, that's amazing. Can we film it? So she filmed it and then she sent it to the TV3 execs. And then a couple of days later, they said, would you like the gig as a presenter? And I said, I'd love the gig as a presenter. What does it entail? So we then set about finding a personal trainer, and that was Leanne Wan in the end.
Mm,
And so we flipped it. We went with a male nutritionist and
yeah.
female trainer, which still to this day hasn't been repeated. No one else
No.
has done that format. It's always a bloke who's the trainer and a
Mm,
girl who's the nutritionist. And even
mm.
today, I'm the only nutritionist in the media in Australia that's a male. They're all otherwise females. So I think it's probably still the same in New Zealand. But
Generally,
that's
yeah.
kind of how it all started. And we just did
Brilliant.
series one and it was successful. And then we did series two, three, and four. So we had a great time.
Fantastic. What a,
Mm,
what a story. Right place, right time, right conversation.
100%.
Yeah,
100%.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, you went back to New Zealand. Sorry, you went back to Oz from New Zealand after you'd finished your studies,
Yeah.
um, a little later and got back into the chiropractic as a practice.
Yeah. Well, so once I
And
graduated from New Zealand, I went and worked for a guy, Simon Kelly, for a little bit in Mount Eden. Worked in there for a little bit, unreal, like a cracking practice, great bloke, great mate of mine. And, I worked with him for only 6 months because I knew
mm,
that I had to finish off like the last season of filming for Downsize Me. I knew that because I was moving back to Australia that Downsize Me would come to an end, which was really sad for me because I love that show and I love the format and I felt like we were doing some really great work in New Zealand. And if I had my time again, I'd try and work a way that I could actually continue to film that show and then keep it going because it was such an inspiring show that changed
mm,
so many thousands of people's lives as a result of
mm,
watching it. So really, at that time, it was groundbreaking because it showed that you just have to eat well and exercise, and you can be really well. What a simple recipe, but
yeah.
that's what it showed. And we did it in a reality format, which people really identified with. And it was kind of back in the days when you could still take the piss out of people. Whereas these days it's
Mm,
a bit too PC. You can't really
mm,
take the piss out
mm,
of people. So back then you could, and so I would love to have continued with that. But I moved back to Australia. My son at the time, well, my son at that time was 7 years old, and he really
yeah.
needed me back in Australia. Otherwise, I had to move him to New Zealand, and that wasn't good for his mum and his
Mm,
relationship. And so I was like, I don't want to separate them. So I
yeah.
moved back to Australia, and then started up a chiropractic practice. Or I actually started working in a chiropractic practice for another guy not far from here, and started a muesli company at the same time
Mm,
because in one of the recipe books that I wrote for the TV show was this muesli that I made that would help people with their nutrition
yeah.
lose weight. It was calorie, controlled and
Yeah.
really healthy, gluten free,
Mm,
unprocessed, no added sugars, like just really good. And
yeah.
so I started that, and that kept me super busy. So that tied in with running a weight loss practice based out of Ferrymead in Christchurch, which was called Slim You at the time. I ran that with another lady, Phyllis, and so we were doing. I was really busy just doing all that sort of stuff, and then Jackson moved in with me and my new partner Amber, and
Mm,
So then we started this family, and life just got so busy. I just then eventually couldn't get back to New Zealand very often, and regularly, and sort of lost a bit of touch, but still keep in
Yeah.
touch with my mates over there.
Yeah. Yeah. Brilliant.
Mm.
And it was around that time that the wellness guys kicked off, and you and the other two guys started the podcast in earnest. And
Yeah.
is that around the
Yeah.
same sort of timing?
Yeah, mate. So I think in around 2009, we started the Wellness Guys. It was just as podcasting kind of came,
Mm,
to both
early.
Australia and New Zealand, like hit the world. Like it was like
Yeah.
podcasting. We're like, what is podcasting?
Yeah.
Then we learned that, if you record something and then you just upload it and then it has to go somewhere, then it would become something. And
Mm,
eventually, we had like 20 episodes done, and we were the number one health podcast in the world. Like it was,
right.
it was ridiculous. Like we're
Yeah.
like, what's going on here? What even is this thing? So we had like thousands of people like flocking in to listen to the Wellness Guys. Lawrence Tam, who had a Canadian accent, for most of us, it just sounds American. So everyone thought he was
Mm,
from America, and
mm,
until he said a boot or
yep.
something else like that. And then, and then we had Brett, who was based in South Australia. So he was in Adelaide. Lawrence
Yeah.
is in Western Australia, and I was in Melbourne. So we're doing this thing over Skype. And so at the
Mm,
time, 20 years ago, like the technology wasn't that good. So for us to be able to get quality audio was difficult, but we
mm,
made it work. And so we ran that podcast for nearly 400 episodes, and then we started a podcast channel, like a platform like ABC,
yes.
NBC or BBC
Mm,
or anything like that. And so we call this thing the Wellness Couch. And we had
yes.
40 different podcasts on that, like running their podcast. We were hosting them. And that was a really great business, like awesome. And then so we got rid of that, but I stayed and I left the Wellness Guys after Lawrence had, kind of moved on. He moved
Mm,
to Sydney doing other things, and Brett wanted to do something different. I didn't really want to do that. And so we let the Wellness Guys go. And I started this other podcast with a mate of
mm,
mine, Marcus Pierce,
mm,
called 100 Not Out. And that's now been going for 12 years. We're 600 plus episodes into that. And like that's cranking. That's going really well.
massive.
So yeah. So that's a great, good, like a really good, fun podcast that I really enjoy doing every single week. And we've
Mm,
done it every single week for 12 years. And it's great. It's awesome.
that's impressive. I'm actually looking at the website now, and yeah, I can see the celebration of the number of episodes. The current one sitting there is stress and hormones. And obviously, you guys must plan ahead a little bit, but that's a hell of a lot of episodes to come up with some content for.
One of my mates today said to me, Damo, how do you think of so many words to talk about? Like, how do you think of stuff? I'm like, I don't know. I don't really know, but we've been, they're only 25, 30-minute podcasts. We interview a lot of people. We interview people that have lived a long and healthy or well life. We
Yeah.
traveled across over to Sardinia and Ikaria, the two European blue zones, and we experienced the lifestyle over there, and we take groups of people over there, and that gives us lots of things to talk about. And so our experiences in those cultures where they experience longevity help us, create lots of different information with insights as to what are people actually doing who are living well. If someone makes it to 80 or 90 or 100 or
Mm,
105 or 110, what was it that they did or are they doing to get there?
mm,
And we get to reflect on that and interview those people, and that gives us some great content, like amazing stories. And some of the most incredible stories are people who have survived the Holocaust, the Jewish Holocaust,
yeah.
in World War II, and they're still going. Some of these people, and the interviews that we have with them are just they're just
Mm,
mind blowing,
mm.
amazing. Mm.
So there are episodes where you're just interviewing these people while you're on your trip.
Yeah, yeah,
Wow. I need to
yeah.
tune in.
Yeah, yeah. So like last year actually this year we interviewed this guy is like 106 years old. I think it's 106, maybe 105, turning 106.
Yeah.
And we're in Sardinia in a little town called Suelo,
Mm,
and sitting in. Oh no, I think we're in Oroli. We're in Oroli, and so we're in Oroli, and we've just been into this museum kind of arty place, which is very cool. And we were eating some local foods and having some local wines that some people have brought out for us from their own vats, cask
mm,
kegs.
mm,
And so we're just sitting there with these elderly people. There's like 15 of us, and we're talking to this guy, And I asked him this question. I said, so do you catch up with your mates every single day? And do you ever run out of things to say? And he said, I catch up with my mates every single day. He speaks to us in Italian, and we've got a translator.
Ah,
And we just sit there and we tell each other lies and we have a great time. And, and so I'm like, how good's this? Like at 100 and something years old, this guy still catching up with his mates. They're having coffee and they're telling each other lies and they acknowledge it and they laugh about it. And it's what keeps them going. And it's a really beautiful experience, which,
it's
you know, I
it's
just love it.
brilliant, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
kind of reassuring to know that it doesn't matter where you are in the world, that is still the recipe for good connection.
Yeah, it is. It is. And that's one of the tenets to longevity is connection,
Mm,
engagement. So
mm,
we know that there's things that you can do to prevent chronic disease because chronic disease really just takes you off the planet sooner.
mm,
So that's,
mm.
and it creates a really sad way to die, really. So if you've got heart disease or diabetes or you've developed a lifestyle cancer or anything like even Alzheimer's, like these things that are related to lifestyle, um, where you have the ability to prevent them through making change, those things shorten your lifespan and they take you sooner than what you need to go.
Yeah,
And so if anyone's wondering, and obviously this is, I feel like I'm preaching to the converted here, but if anyone's, wondering why do you want to stay healthy and well, it's so that you don't leave the planet like too soon,
yeah,
basically.
yeah.
For things that you can control. Obviously, there's things that we can't control, but for the things that you can control, like why
Mm,
would you let that take you off the planet?
mm,
Life's too good. So
mm.
it's just worth sticking around for.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's quite inspiring watching. I think you may have seen the How to Live to 100 with Dan Buettner
Yeah.
on Netflix, and he visits the
Yeah.
zones. And
Well, he invented
I'm
them.
curious because you've been there. Are there things that you came across that were sort of not necessarily covered? Are there additional things that we're not aware of that you had some really good insights into, or is it pretty accurate and we're on track if we do follow some of the key things that those people do?
Yeah. So Dan, when he did this research in 2007 with National Geographic, they essentially just were looking for trends. They were trying to find out, what was important. That they were trying to, see what was relevant. Um, and when they found that there was these clusters that where people were living a long time, they put blue pins there, and that's how they ended up calling them blue zones. So
Ah,
Dan coined the name blue zones, or another researcher coined it blue zones because that's where these pins were clumped. So then when they went there, they tried to identify, was it a food item or was it, something was it a tea or was it something that they were breathing in? Was it fresh, clean air? Was it being by the ocean or what was it? And there was no link across any of the span around nutrition to longevity, zero link, except for one thing, and that was that they all consumed some form of legume. That was it, but not en masse. Like it's not the main source
mm,
of their protein or not the main source of their fiber. It was just that they all consumed that. That's the only thing that they could find.
mm,
Um, when you look at the Sardinians, they cook with saturated fat. They're cooking with lard, and they're cooking with not ghee, lard and tallow. If you look at the Greeks, they're cooking with lard and tallow. If you go to Okinawa, they're cooking probably not with much fat really at all. If you go to
mm,
Loma Linda, they're a low fat diet because it's Seventh Day Adventist, so it's all very low fat, and they're using margarines and stuff. And then if you look at Costa Rica, they're using saturated fat. So the thing that kind of comes through in the blue zones information from Dan in wanting to live to 100, I think that's the name of the show, is that they all consume a plant-based polyunsaturated or monounsaturated fat.
mm.
And that's not the truth. That's not the truth. In
Ah,
fact, it was only in the 60s, the 50s, late 50s and 60s, that these countries, Greece and Italy, actually started consuming olive oil or cooking with olive oil. They had it, but not en masse. And really,
mm,
what we now see, what we would now say is the Mediterranean diet, which includes olive oil, is not really strictly what the Mediterranean diet was for these centenarians that are now living at 100 years old. In fact, they might
mm.
have olive oil with some bread, but it's not really necessarily what they've done in the years that set them up for longevity. So
Okay.
it's a really fascinating thing, you know. So from
Mm.
a food perspective, there's been some manipulation of information to make it seem like this is what the Mediterranean diet is:
Yeah.
olives and tomato and cucumber and eggs and a protein and heaps of olive oil is what they've always said. But
Mm.
it's actually not. Like it
Okay.
is now. The modern day version of it is, because you know science would say that olive oil is good for us, and it is. But that's not what it was. It's not.
Right.
Yeah, so
Right.
it's very interesting.
Yeah.
But definitely, you know, from a movement perspective, purpose, engagement, nutrition, spirituality, all of those things that Dan covered in the show are
Mm.
spot on. And
Mm.
I mean, he's done such a great job with it. I just think that there's some other bits and pieces that might have been a bit tweaked
Yep.
to maybe match the narrative.
Sure. Sure.
Mm,
What I found encouraging was that it was the last episode where they tried to replicate the conditions
in
of one of the
Singapore.
blue zones in, a typical Western city, and they picked a city.
Yeah.
And over time, obviously, they had to get the community behind them. But over time, they started seeing some positive improvement.
Isn't that cool? Isn't
Oh,
that cool? Like it's just, it
it's heartening.
highlights the benefit of lifestyle and lifestyle medicine,
Mm,
essentially.
mm,
And really just making sure that you're exercising and moving, making sure that you're eating good food, you know, of some variety, you know, like it doesn't have to be keto, it doesn't have to be paleo, it doesn't have to be vegan, it doesn't have to be anything that's kind of branded. It probably doesn't even have to be Mediterranean, but there's some tenets to the food, and the way in which you pull all that meal together that are really important. You know, the key components being enough protein, so
mm,
important, and
mm,
then high quality carbohydrate fuel, primarily from vegetables and fruits and salads, you know.
mm,
And then obviously they eat bread and they have rice and some pasta and all that sort of stuff, but it's not the main part of their meal. And of course, then
mm,
eating
mm,
good quality fats, you know. So it largely comes down to the amount of the type of protein they're consuming. And in fact, if you look at the Sardinians, they were basically omnivores and probably mainly ate only meat. Didn't really eat much more. It was just meat. Hardly ate vegetables, hardly ate fruit. Because
right.
the people who lived a long time worked so hard on the land, they didn't have access to all of that stuff. So
Mm,
they
mm,
weren't able to. So
mm.
very different diets. And there's two countries there that are in the Mediterranean and they have totally different diets. But they both have exceptional longevity, which is very fascinating.
So you've been to both Ikaria and Sardinia,
Yeah, Rich. Yeah.
right?
We go every year. So every year, about August, September, we chuff on over
Yeah.
and we stay in Nas for 10 days. That's in Ikaria. That's
Mm,
where the studies kind of took place. So when Dan Buettner and National Geographic went over to Ikaria to investigate, they stayed in the village of Nas with a lady by the name of Thea. And Thea is one of our friends now. And we go there, and we've been going there for 8 years.
right.
And so when they went to Sardinia to explore, because there's 13 blue zones, 13 villages in Sardinia that are the blue zones,
Okay.
um, and there's a population of like 1.4 million people in Sardinia, but there's only, and it's spread out. It's massive, like it's very very big, and it's in these little pockets. And so they met with a guy and they used the services of a guy by the name of Evo, and he's now one of our friends. And so we use Thea to help us for 10 days in Ikaria, and we use Evo to help us for 10 days in Sardinia. And then
Brilliant.
we take these tours over and we just hang out with them. It's amazing.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So it's an organized trip that sort of followers of what the podcast and fans can jump on and be part of the tour.
Yeah, yeah, that's right.
Fantastic.
So
Yeah.
it's open to the public.
Yeah.
We interview everybody to come along, because you don't want to take anyone that's kind of not, you know, going to fit the group or is not
Mm,
able to do the things that we need to do. So we've had situations where people haven't been able to come because they're not fit enough to be able to come, because there's a challenging terrain. We do a lot of
yeah.
walking. You know, we move into the gardens, we go to their parties. You know, so there's a lot of movement that you know you've got to be able to do. So
Mm, mm,
um, and so we have a conversation with people. We interview them to see if
sure.
they're going to be suitable to be able to come, which is really important, because you don't want to get a group together that
Mm,
isn't able to achieve all the things that you would hope that they could achieve, because one or two people can't do everything they're supposed to.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
we kind of protect the group that way.
Sure. Yeah. That
Mm.
makes total sense.
Mm.
Um, a bit of a swing in a different direction. I've got a couple of bits that I noted, and I think they may be logs of yours. So the first one is why you ripped up your manuscript. Can you
Yeah.
give us a bit of an understanding of what? It's a great headline, but what's that about?
Rich, I wrote a book, like off the back of the TV show, I wrote a book and like it's 230 something pages, um, heaps of words. And when I went back to read it, what I realized is that there was some information that had changed. It now no longer was accurate. And then I thought to myself, oh my gosh, that's not ideal. And then I waited another couple of years, kind of tinkered with it. And then I realized that there was parts in that book that I had written that I know now no longer believed. And I was like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, like I don't think I can actually publish this book because I don't think the things that I'm saying at the time when I'm writing it will necessarily be true and correct in say 4, 5, or even 10 years time. So
Mm,
like now, I mean, that book I probably wrote that book nearly 15 years ago now, and I never published it, and I still have it sitting on my computer, where I kind of play with it to kind of work out, what can I make work, but I feel like I couldn't put out to the public something, even at the height of my, I suppose, media profile. I couldn't put a book out that I felt in good conscience might not be true and accurate in a few
mm,
years' time, and so I didn't put it out,
yeah.
um, and that's why I haven't published, because I'm nervous to put something out that might not be true and correct in some time's time. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I suspect that that's the case for a lot of nutritional guides. There's lots of them out there, and lots of food books. It's sort of a combination of nutrition and food
Yeah.
recipes, I mean. And yeah, I suspect that as the science keeps evolving, those things will be slightly out of date, quite potentially quite quickly. Yeah,
Yeah, and so where I'm going with it now is probably a little less aggressive, which is probably not what a publisher wants. Like the publisher wants you to take a stance. They want you to
yeah,
say
yeah,
this.
yeah.
I want you to say that, and I'm like, but I want people to understand that living really well is actually quite easy, and it doesn't have to be prescriptive. And so like that's where like the current writing of my book is heading, is that it's a non-prescriptive approach to living a great, long, healthy life. That's the
Yes.
idea. Mm.
So it's more about sort of guiding people in a direction rather than saying do this.
Yeah, rather than being, penal. I don't want to whip
Yeah,
people into
yeah.
making good choices. It's not
Mm, mm.
it's not very motivating or inspiring.
I know. The other one that stood out was because I'm a sufferer myself, was hay fever, how I nailed it. Is
Yeah,
this to do with the immune system and the different sort of immune pathways?
yeah, totally, Rich. So essentially, when we have hay fever or an allergy, dermatitis, asthma, anaphylaxis, any of that sort of stuff. Essentially, it's a storm of histamine, and this
Mm,
histamine storm occurs in the mucous membranes, and it occurs as a result of the immune system, your immune system, recognizing something that's not self. And it cracks it. It literally cracks the shits and goes, I'm going after whatever that is, and I'm mounting a response to it to protect the body. So that response is to constrict the blood vessels, to constrict the airways, to secrete more mucus, to mop up whatever that debris is that's
yeah.
creating irritation. And that's what we would experience, either swelling on our skin like redness, or we'd have hay fever causing sneezing with lots of mucus,
Mm,
asthma if it's affecting your lungs,
mm,
irritable bowel syndrome if it's affecting your gut, um, and anaphylaxis if it's even more serious than that.
mm.
So I was doing some research to try and understand, how I could get rid of a hives episode that I had. And so I had these
Right.
hives, couldn't explain what it was. Maybe I rolled in some grass or whatever. I still couldn't understand why.
Mm,
And the only thing that I had at the time was probiotics. And I knew that probiotics at the time, we're talking like, it's got to be 20, maybe, it's got to be 18 years ago.
mm,
Um, only probiotics I had at the time contained a particular probiotic that I knew impacted mast cells and mast cell degranulation. So I thought, well, if I take enough of these, maybe the my histamine response might go down. So like I took maybe 8 or 10 of them, and I rattled around for a little bit, and within half an hour, the hives had disappeared. And I was like, Wow, that's really interesting. I'll keep that in mind.
Mm,
So then we bought a cat, and we were looking for a hypoallergenic cat, and we bought this little cat, beautiful little grey Burmese, thing. She's unreal. Her name's Misty, and she's so hyperallergic, not hypoallergic. She's hyperallergic. When I touched her, I blew up. My eyes puffed up. I was all snotty. I always had a cat, and she
mm,
leaves fur everywhere, which means that there's dander all over the place. And I was like, this is going to kill me. So then kind of shuffled through a few things, and I looked for solutions. And I went back to that probiotic, and I thought, what is it? So I then found out that they manufactured it in larger quantities now, and I was thought, well, how about I still take a high dose, and we'll see what happens.
mm,
Within 3 days, I was now no longer reacting to my cat. And I was like, this
mm,
is mental. So
mm,
I continued that process. I took this probiotic, which is called Lactobacillus rhamnosus LGG. I
mm.
took this probiotic at a high dose with Yakult. And the reason why I took it with Yakult is because I felt like it needed to fuel the bacteria, and I knew that Yakult had a fuel in it, like a prebiotic in it, that would actually, which is the fermented dairy, that would
Yeah.
then enable the bacteria to probably do something better. It
Mm,
was just that's how I thought about it.
mm, mm.
And I also then learned that this bacteria, this probiotic, was being used by the Murdoch Children's Institute um, at the Children's Hospital here in Melbourne to help cure people's peanut allergies, like with
Ah,
a strict protocol.
yeah.
And so when I contacted the allergist, the specialist, the pediatrician, Mimi Tang, and asked her what she was doing, she said, "This is what I'm doing." She told me, I was like, "Oh my gosh, that's amazing." And she now has children who are 8 years post finishing treatment that are now no longer allergic to peanuts because they did this probiotic.
Mm,
But please, who is if you're listening to this and you think, oh my gosh, I've got the cure for peanut, you have to do it under supervision.
yeah.
It can't be done just off the bat.
Yeah.
So I then applied this to things that weren't anaphylactic. I applied this to eczema, dermatitis, hay fever, and asthma. And I had an incredible experience with me, and I've had an incredible experience with a lot of my patients using this particular probiotic at a specific dose paired with the Yakult. And within 3 to 4 weeks, what we find is that there's a significant downregulation in mast cell degranulation. And as a result, the sensitivities are kind of very well managed moving forward. And I
Brilliant.
now have my cat. She's 9 now. She's unreal. And I'm not allergic to her. She sleeps, pretty much on my face, and I don't have any allergy to her at all.
Wow.
And anybody comes to our house who has this allergy, I just give them these probiotics, and they're like, "Well, this probiotic works." And my patients, I prescribe it to them for hay fever, and it works really well for them as well. So it's a
Fantastic.
probiotic you can get in. I don't know if you can get it in the UK, but you can definitely get it in New Zealand and definitely get it in Australia.
Yeah, I might get that from you in terms of the some detail on that because that could
Yeah.
be a useful thing to put in the show notes potentially. So
Yeah, I'd want to be maybe a little bit careful of it. You probably should see a practitioner to get
yes,
access to it
yes.
because it's a
Oh,
strain specific probiotic.
yeah,
Like when you're using strain specific probiotics, you're looking for a condition specific result. And that should be done under the guidance of a practitioner
sure.
rather than actually trying to go and do it yourself by heading down to your local pharmacy and picking up something that's similar. It's got to be done with the right stuff.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I certainly won't put it in the show notes then.
Yeah, I reckon if anyone
Oh,
wants to do it, like just find a naturopath
yeah,
who can take you through that, or your chiropractor,
yeah.
or your nutritionist, or your GP. Maybe you got a GP that's integrative. They could do that too.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Fantastic. So just so I'm clear, did you take a high dose initially when you're suffering,
Hmm.
and then do you continue on after your symptoms have subsided? Do you carry on for a while with a lower dose or
Yeah, no, I've kept people on the high dose for 3 to 4 weeks, and
right?
then teeter that out to a lower dose to maybe one a day after a few months.
Mm,
And then eventually nothing. And now these days, I live in an area where there's lots of plane trees. Plane trees drop these little needles, and they're really bad, and it can really trigger your allergies and sensitivities. I used to be highly allergic to them, and now I'll pop a couple of these probiotics, and I don't have any issue. So I don't know what would happen if I didn't take any at all, but I
mm.
take a couple from time to time, not every day, and definitely not every week.
The last time I was in Melbourne,
Yeah.
was there for my wife's birthday, and
Yeah.
it was October, November,
Oh yeah.
and it was about a good 10-minute walk down to the river. And by the time we got to the river, to the restaurant that we were in, I was absolutely crying. It was quite windy.
Yeah. You had the plane needles.
Pollen
Yeah.
count through the roof. We sat
Yes.
down, and it was like I was crying in front of her, nose oozing
Boogers
snot.
everywhere.
And
Yeah.
I literally had to stand up and go and find a pharmacy to get
Yeah.
some, I can't remember what I
Antihistamines.
had, but it was useful at the time.
Yeah.
And it was just so potent. I'd never experienced such strong hay fever symptoms than when I was a kid. And so walking through tall grass that was sort of
Yeah.
almost up to my ears. Um,
Like a ryegrass or something. I know.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So
But
that's why
here,
that stood out for me because if there's anything that, I'd rather not take steroids to try and suppress the symptoms. If there's something slightly healthier and there's probably going to be positive side effects from that for other things as well in terms of the gut environment anyway.
yeah.
That sounds like a win-win.
Yeah, there's always upstream and downstream consequences when you make an intervention. So your upstream consequences, um, hopefully, are the ones that you're trying to manage, and your downstream consequences are the things that you don't realize are happening but are actually happening. So
Mm,
I'm happy to have upstream and downstream consequences from taking something that's natural and healthy,
mm,
good for you,
mm.
rather than actually upstream downstream consequences from something that can be life threatening. So yeah, I'm careful of that stuff.
That will be the ultimate test is to return to Melbourne about the same time of year and see if my symptoms are less.
Here's what I learned. You've got to be exposed to the protein you're trying to manage. So when you're taking the
Right.
probiotic, you've still got to be exposed to it. So I often say to people in the hay fever season, start taking the probiotic as the pollens start to lift, because then you're starting to mount an appropriate response as the pollens are lifting, as opposed to waiting until you get the symptoms. Then you got to kind of manage it afterwards.
Yeah.
So, but it's you when you get exposed to the protein, that's really where you want the protection.
Yeah. Yeah. Got you. Got you.
Mm. Mm.
Well, I've certainly managed to get through most of what I've found on my research journey. Just a little go. Can we go back to the cereal? Was it forage?
Yeah, I had forage. I
Yeah.
ran forage for a long time. Prior to that, I had a different name, but I had a falling out with my business partner, and then I created a whole new range,
Yeah.
and it was forage.
Yeah.
And I closed that down in 2019. It was just a really difficult product to continue to keep on in the market.
Right.
Very expensive. It was hard, tough for us to manufacture it, tough to keep it fresh, and then tough for the consumer because it was so expensive. So
Mm,
I
mm,
think these days there's an appetite for a healthy muesli that hasn't been, cooked with sugar or even cooked, a
mm,
raw thing.
mm.
But it's just a marketplace that I think you need a lot of money to play in order to make something work.
Yeah.
That's where money will make money. And
Mm.
I didn't want to allocate funds towards, FMCG that was so volatile with food.
Yeah. Yeah. Fair enough. There
Mm.
are certainly the market's developed a lot since then, hasn't it? In terms of the ranges, the different brands and manufacturers that are out there now. I mean, some are better than others, but it's that category has certainly expanded.
It has expanded, but it's amazing because in the supermarket, certainly over here in Australia, it's the main area that's experiencing shrinkage. So it's a declining marketplace.
Right.
The muesli aisles are getting smaller. There's less
Mm,
that are being sold. Most distributors won't distribute a muesli anymore. You've got to be doing self distribution. So
mm.
the marketplace has really changed. It's very
Okay.
different. Mm,
Yeah. Yeah.
mm. But I think that's
Challenging.
the advent of paleo and keto and carnivore and all those sorts of branded,
Mm.
um, quite specific eating programs that would be excluding grains and nuts and seeds. So
Right.
when you're doing that, and you because you're appealing to the same sort of marketplace,
Mm, mm,
you're appealing to people that are health conscious and wanting to get the most from their body. So
mm.
if they decide to move in a particular direction. So when I first launched Forage, paleo came to Australia, and that was the worst thing that could have ever happened was that paleo came to Australia when I launched Forage, because even though it was gluten free and high protein and good for you, much of what was in it was kind of you know but according to the paleo movement, not good for you,
Mm,
which we've since now evolved out of to understand that everything that was in it was actually very, very good for you. But it
mm,
took some time to get there.
yeah, yeah.
Mm.
Cool. Excellent. So this is about the time that I start winding up and asking for top tips. What business, personal, doesn't really matter, but that's the theme. What could be what would Damien's top tips be for health professionals, in terms of routines, rituals, those sorts of things?
Mm. Okay, so I think from a success perspective in practice, the most important thing you could do is be available for your patients.
Mm,
Your lifestyle occurs later on down the track, but initially you've got to be available for your clients.
yeah.
If you're not available for them, they'll just go find somebody else. It's such a congested, crowded marketplace that in order to be successful, you've got to be available for them all the time, and you just can't not be available. And then if you're going to be away, you're going to take a break, which you should always take a break. Just make sure that they're aware that you're going to take a break, and or you might have somebody else that comes in and looks after them while you're away. So you're
Mm,
always putting them front of mind. It's so important.
I like that.
But in order to do that, you've got to look after yourself. It's so
Yes.
important. So just eat good food. Make sure you're having, and I know that this is a contentious thing, but it shouldn't be. You really do need to eat breakfast. Like it's a crazy thing to not eat breakfast. If you're at an age where you don't need to eat breakfast because you can just run on adrenaline and it's not really affecting you, at some point it will affect you. At
Mm,
50 now, I understand what happens when you don't do something properly for a decade. And
yeah.
if you're not doing something properly for 3 decades in a row, from the 20s through to the 50s, then you're in a lot of trouble because you've had
Mm,
a lot of, dysfunction in the body. Try not to be, too hard on your body. Be kind to it. So exercise is really important. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to go out and do triathlon or Ironman. You don't have to be Spartan. You don't have to be a CrossFitter. Um, you don't even have to be a yoga instructor. But if you are, then continue to be kind to yourself by exercising really well and nourishing your body really well. I think
mm,
that's really
mm,
important.
mm. Love it.
You want more
Scribbling while
tips?
you talk.
Okay, good. If you want more tips, I think the other thing too is surround yourself with really enthusiastic minds. They don't
Mm,
have to be great minds. They just got to be enthusiastic. People that are going to encourage you. You don't have to be with the smartest. You don't have to be the smartest person. You don't have to hang around with the smartest person. You just got to hang around with somebody who's going to encourage you to follow your dreams and just to work hard. Um, the only way anyone's ever going to be successful is either through luck or working hard, and most people aren't that lucky. So I
mm,
think it's really important just to work hard, really serve your client base, do everything you possibly can to give them an incredible experience, and make it A grade. Work out what you would like. If it doesn't matter whether or not you're working in a community where people are in a lower demographic, or you're working in a community where people are a higher demographic, you always want to be providing something that is exceptional that they're
mm,
probably not going to be used to. So
mm.
that's all you want to do. It's something that they can afford that is exceptional. And if you do that, people will flock to you.
Love it. Beautiful. That's a great note to end on.
Thanks, Rich.
Thank you. It's been great chatting. I really enjoyed it and learning as well. And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking of Ikaria trip at some point.
Well, you'd be welcome, mate. We'd love to have you along. And clearly, as fit as you are, you would nail it over there. It wouldn't be an issue. But it's
Oh,
a really special trip. It's a life-changing experience. The immersion in Ikaria is amazing, and the experience and the learnings that you get from Sardinia will just blow your mind. So it's they're really fabulous trips. And if anyone wants to look at it, check out the website. If you can put in the show notes, it'd be great,
yes.
Rich. It's 100notout.com. And
Yeah.
if you want more information, happy to have a chat with you.
Wonderful. That's very kind. Great. Thank you very much, Damien. It's been great fun.
Thanks, Rich.
Cheers.